There we go. All right, you're up.
Welcome everyone to Wasatch Beekeepers June meeting. We're going to begin with our guest speaker this evening, Lars Chittka, author of the book Mind of a Bee, which is the topic of tonight's presentation. Lars is a professor of sensory and behavioral ecology at Queen Mary College of the University of London, founder of the Research Center for Psychology at Queen Mary. Lars' area of interest and research encompasses the evolution of sensory systems and cognition using insect-flower interactions as a model system. He has made fundamental contributions to our understanding of animal cognition and its impact on evolutionary fitness, studying bumblebees and honeybees. Among his many honors includes elected fellow of numerous professional societies, for example, the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, and the American Association of the Advancement of Science. He's also the leader of the band Killer Bee Queens. Thank you for attending our club meeting this evening, Lars. You already started sharing, so the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Should I start?
Yes, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this very kind introduction and the invitation, of course. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. So yeah, I've studied, as you've just heard, for many decades, the sensory systems, the behavior, and the learning of bees. But surely it's still a big step from studying these kinds of capacities to referring to the mind of an insect, which to many of us might perhaps sound a little counterintuitive. And so I guess I owe you a bit of an explanation of what I mean by that. Why the mind of a bee? So what I want to explore is actually whether bees could be said to have a form of consciousness, and at a bare bones level, that entails the capacities to think and to feel at some level. And to break this down a little further, what I want to explore is whether bees have flexible access to own individual memories, whether they have mental representations of space and of time, whether they can perhaps combine memories into concepts, revealing some sort of more advanced thinking ability, whether they can plan, at least for the immediate future, and perhaps most contentiously, I want to explore a little bit whether bees could be said to have emotion-like states. So there is quite a general awareness, I think, in the general public that social insects can do very impressive things. In this case, obviously, these aren't bees that you're seeing here, but there are the outcomes of the activities of termites versus human beings. And if you divide the scale factor out, then at least at first glance, these two structures look remotely similar. But the common thinking goes that even though the structures are impressive and somehow externally have similar shapes, that they come about by entirely different pathways in the human species versus the social insects. In humans, so people think everything is driven by intelligence, by an architect who does the planning, who has a vision and a master plan, that once he's sort of built all of this up in his mind and his drawings, they can then pass it down to engineers, to builders and so on, and put their vision into reality. And conversely, in social insects, so the thinking goes, all the complexity emerges from simple behaviors, from the workers that are equipped with basically hardwired rules from the emergence from the pupa, and then just behave like little robots. And as a result of an interaction of all these little robots, such complexity emerges. And this perceived dichotomy between a top-down kind of approach in the human species versus bottom-up in insects is something that I want to deconstruct a little bit tonight. And of course, the fascination, human fascination with social insect architectures is not novel. People have marveled for thousands of years, for example, at the complexity, the beauty, the symmetry, the functionality of honeycomb. And we as beekeepers, of course, see this structure on a daily basis. Sometimes we forget just how wonderful it is. There are no other animals really, certainly not amongst the mammals other than the human species, that build anything of such mathematical optimality, such regularity, and so on. If you think of birds' nests or beaver dams, okay, there is some sort of a collaborative construction of something, but these are fairly messy structures in comparison to the hexagonal honeycomb that is really mathematically optimal in terms of minimizing material usage while maximizing stability and storage space and so on. And of course, people have wondered for many centuries how such structures might come about. And here's a quotation from a French naturalist, Comte de Buffon, who suggested this about how honeybee comb might materialize. He said, place together in the same room 10,000 automatons animated with a living force and all induced through the perfect resemblance of their outer and inner being. If we admit the least degree of feeling in these automatons, even only such as is necessary for them to be conscious of their own existence, seek their own conservation, avoid noxious things, prepare useful things, etc., their work will not only be regular, well-proportioned, similar, equal, but it will also have symmetry, strength, convenience to the highest point of perfection. Now, this is a curious mix of perspectives because he refers to the bees of automatons, but at the same time seems to take it for granted that they are conscious, that they have feelings, and somehow suggests that as a byproduct of 10,000 conscious automatons all being stuck together in a common environment, somehow this beautiful structure will emerge. And obviously, we know that it's not that simple. So we can't put 10,000 fruit flies or zebrafish or squirrels together in a box and hope that they'll suddenly start building something. So it's a bit more complicated than that. And the first person who was interested in the inner workings of the beehive to explore how bees actually construct this beautiful structure that is honeycomb was François Hubert and his team. And so the first thing that team needed to do, obviously, to see what's going on in the otherwise dark box, was they experimented with inserting glass ceilings and walls to just see what the bees might be doing inside. And as you all know, the bees' habitual pathway to building honeycomb is to start at the ceiling, build the foundations there, use gravity as a reference, and then gradually build downwards, as you can see in this image. And the first thing that Hubert and his team realized when they inserted a glass ceiling into the hive was that the bees didn't like very much to attach the foundations of their comb to a slippery glass ceiling. What did the bees do? They just started at the bottom. They built the foundations on the floor and then gradually built the structure upwards, like a tower construction, basically. Now, you might say, well, that still looks like a repetitive, robotic-like process. And yes, it probably does. But the point here is that if you had built a robot to mimic the natural structure that bees build, start at the top, build downwards along the direction of gravity, that robot would already have fallen flat on its nose with this simple challenge. Unless you built an extra programming routine into the robot telling it, if you can't attach to the ceiling, then invert the alignment of the building structure with gravity so that you now start at the bottom. But you'd have to program it, or you'd have to tell it what the desirable outcome is, in other words, a plan. Now, the next thing that Hubert and his team did, they just step by step made it harder for the bees. And so what they did next was to insert both a glass ceiling and a glass floor. What did the bees do in that case? They started on one of the side walls, built their construction laterally through the cavity until that reached the opposite wall. So again, another degree of freedom and flexibility in the bees' construction abilities. But the most remarkable thing happened when Hubert and his team, after this sideways construction had begun, the authors inserted a glass pane into the path of the ongoing construction, as you can see in panel B. So the bees had already started to build their normally two-dimensional flat sheet of comb to ultimately reach the opposite side. And after that had started, several days before the comb would have reached that target, the authors inserted this glass wall on the target wall. Now, you might have expected that maybe the bees would just have continued pottering away, building in the same direction until they'd reached that glass wall, and then decided, well, this isn't quite optimal. Let's reinforce this a bit, perhaps build some extra wax columns. That's not what they did. What happened instead is that days before that suboptimal outcome would have been reached, they turned the entire construction 90 degrees and attached it to the nearest wood wall, seemingly anticipating a future suboptimal outcome and averting that outcome. And Hubert, 200 years ago at the time, exclaimed that I acknowledge that I could not suppress a sentiment of admiration for an action in which the brightest foresight was displayed. So in these experiments, which were very visionary to my mind and probing the limits of the flexibility of bees' construction ability, they actually detected a kind of planning ability, not just a robotic-like output process. Now, most of our work in exploring the bees' intelligence focuses on bees' interactions with flowers. And of course, the first thing that you need to do if you want to examine learning is to recognize that bees are individuals with individual experiences, individual preferences that can be modified by learning, but you need to know who's who. And for that reason, we use various means, sometimes RFID chips, but sometimes simple number tags where the individuals are clearly identifiable by a combination of color and number. And the first thing that is perhaps obvious, although again, as beekeepers, we sometimes forget just how marvelous bees' orientation is. Bees, of course, navigate naturally over miles. And every time you think about it, for me at least, it's a miracle how a tiny-brained insect flying away from its native home for 5, 6, 7 miles reliably finds its way back through the landscape. And of course, in man-made environments, this is facilitated by buildings being individually unique and recognizable. Natural habitats look more like this landscape near my second home around here in central Mexico, where there are thousands and thousands of trees that all look similar. There are dozens of hill shapes that all look similar. And yet, without fail, you have to find the way back to your native tree hole. You cannot fail. You cannot survive on your own unless you're lucky and you get adopted into another nest, but that is probably a long shot. And from one single tree out of these thousands that all look similar, your nearest nectar source can be 1-2 miles over here behind that hill that bees have to fly to reliably. And I've deliberately chosen a foggy picture because that's a condition that bees quite often have to master. Your nearest good pollen patch might be over here, and you have to, in many cases, bees memorize multiple paths. They have to remember all of these ways, the landmarks, their alignment with compass cues and so on, to reliably find their way home. I don't know if any of you do natural, sort of wild nature hiking without technology. This is a tough challenge. Without any kind of mobile phone satellite access, without maps, just to navigate using memory is a tough challenge, but it is one that bees master and have to master. Nature doesn't tolerate failures for them on a daily basis. So here's an example of an image of a human in that sort of environment. Imagine walking through this sort of environment for 5-6 miles, maybe looking for a good mushroom patch, collecting all the mushrooms and having to find your way back. No path, no mobile phone, no map, just your memory. It is not trivial. The way we nowadays study bees navigation is with this technology called harmonic radar, where the bottom dish emits a signal that is picked up by a transponder here attached to a honeybee drone, converted to a different frequency, and then the reflected signal is picked up by the top dish here. And with that technology, we can follow bees, including male bees, over their entire lives, from the maiden flight to the last one. And because bee navigation, honeybee worker navigation has already been studied for a long time, in one study here, we were specifically interested in the honeybee drone's navigation. So what you're seeing here is a simulation of a honeybee drone's orientation flight, his first flight ever. And you can see the position in 3 dimensions, as well as what that drone sees while he's exploring his environment. So these 2 boomerang shapes are the views through that drone's eyes. You can see that this view is quite coarse pixelated because they're the optics of bee eyes mean that they can resolve less spatial detail than we humans, but they compensate by seeing faster, by processing more information per unit time than we humans can. And so what was interesting for us when we started exploring drones navigation is that among scientists, there is, or was until a few years ago, still a debate whether drone congregation areas are actually naturally forming or whether they are, in a sense, the result of scientists' experimental methods. Because in many cases, the way these areas were studied was by using lures where people either drenched a little piece of cloth in the relevant pheromones, or they used a caged queen, which of course emits pheromones. And then some scientists, for good reason, criticized this approach and said, well, maybe these drone congregation areas are just actually forming because you guys put out these odor marks there. And so one way of getting around this problem, to explore where drones like to congregate without the presence of pheromone, is just to radar track the drones themselves. And that's what we did in one study here. And so here's a satellite image of a flat, relatively flat landscape from above. And what you're seeing here, sped up 120 times, is the first flight of a honeybee drone around exploring the surroundings of the hive. Here it is repeated again. You can see that he's looping in various directions and then coming back to the hive. So at that stage, the flight is highly convoluted and not directed to any particular destination. Now, in the next image, here's another beautiful drone. In the next flight, we can see an experienced male who is flying, as you can see, in a straight line. He clearly knows where he's going. He's not searching. And then he's reached an area where he displays very convoluted flight, often for an extended period, and then comes back, perhaps after 20 or so minutes. And indeed, we found that many males are familiar with multiple such areas where they show these convoluted flights. So they keep in mind 2 or 3 such areas, which they patrol in the hope of finding a queen. And you can see here in this heat map the activities of multiple drones. And wherever there's a brighter zone, that's where there's more convoluted flight, more drone activity. And you can see that clearly there are some popular zones here and several over here, which are marked by very heavy drone flight activity. And so these are probably the long described drone congregation areas where these males hope to encounter a queen. And of course, many beekeepers have known this all along, but we've confirmed it experimentally with this technology that the popular areas stay largely stable from one year to the next. So you can see here 2 sequential years, 2016 and 2017, where drones return to the same general areas that are the most popular ones and not any other ones. So there is stability of these most popular areas in the landscape. What we had hoped to do with our radar technology, of course, is to identify what it actually is. What are the landscape features that are particularly attractive for the drones? And the answer is we still don't know. It turned out that each individual male's path to these target areas is highly idiosyncratic. There is no single landscape feature that they all seem to be piloting to. They all approach these target areas from different directions and so on. So clearly there is something inherent to these areas where they congregate that attracts a lot of them, but we still don't know what the possible landscape features are. So many mysteries remain to be solved. Now, many of the intelligence tests that we do with bees are in the context of flower visitation. And the first thing that is important to realize when thinking about bees' interactions with flowers is that, of course, their perception of flowers is completely different from how we see them. Bees can see ultraviolet light. We cannot, so we are completely blind to these patterns, which in some cases just show to us a homogeneously one-colored flower. Through bees' eyes, these are often show very intricate patterns that are memorable for bees, but that also guide them to the parts of the flowers where there's nectar or pollen. The other thing that is important in this context of bees visiting flowers is that they have to be careful shoppers in the flower supermarket. That is, in any beehive's flight range, there might be several dozen different plant species, all differing in their nectar and pollen quantities and qualities. And you have to identify those species which basically deliver the best cost-benefit ratio, memorize the signals, the advertising billboards, the flower signals, colors, patterns, odors that are associated with these rewards. The rewards themselves, you don't see them. You just see the signals. You memorize the signals and where they are in space, and then come back to the same signals that advertise the same goodies. And that, of course, requires a very elaborate memory. And in many ways, we merely capitalize on bees' stunning flexibility in associating almost anything with rewards. So what you can see here is an experiment where we've trained a bee to land on a little platform with a drop of nectar that you can see here in front of an image of a human face. And we do that a few times. And after the bee has learned this, we then present it with basically the equivalent of a crime witness test, where there are now multiple faces presented. And we ask, can you now identify that one face that previously was associated with a reward? And you can see here in this image that even for quite similar pairs of faces, the bee's performance is still about 80% in identifying the correct face. And of course, this doesn't necessarily mean they identify these as faces. It just goes to show their flexibility in associating visual displays with sugar rewards. And of course, this associative learning, linking color signals to rewards and so on, has been known for quite a while. But what about real intelligence tests? Lots of my colleagues working on primates and clever corvid birds have always said, well, yeah, of course, we believe that bees can learn flower signals, but that's what a bee has to do naturally. She does it all the time. She's pre-programmed to learn such things. And they said that they usually would use tests that provoke test the limits of an animal's flexibility with learning stuff that they don't daily encounter in nature. And so in this experiment, this is now a few decades old actually, we asked if bees can count. And so we had a hive over here. We trained the bees to fly along a series of 3 landmarks. After the 3rd one, they would get a reward. And after they'd learned this, we then changed the number of landmarks over the same distance to see if bees would more be guided by their familiar distance or by the number of landmarks. So in one experiment, over the same distance from the hive to the feeding station, we had now 4 landmarks instead of 3. And we asked, would bees just fly to the familiar distance or land earlier after the correct number of 3? And it turned out that indeed, the more landmarks we inserted, the earlier the bees would land as a group. And if we reduced the number of landmarks over the same distance, many bees would overshoot the target and fly a further distance. So they were clearly guided by the number of landmarks. And this was actually the first time I got some press coverage for a discovery that we published by Dave Barry in the Washington Post Journal, of all places. And he wrote, he's a fantastic comedian. If you're unfamiliar with him, I strongly recommend him. So he wrote, the article states that these scientists, whose names are Lars and Chittka, set up various landmarks between a beehive and a bee feeder. After the bees had located the feeder, Lars and Chittka started changing the locations of the feeder and landmarks. The surprising result, Lars and Chittka were both killed by eyeball stings. No, seriously, they discovered the bees were locating oops, oh, I've gone a step too far, where the bees were locating the feeder by counting the landmarks. Yes, bees can count. This means that bees, in terms of math skills, are ahead of most American high school graduates. The whole article is beautiful, so I strongly recommend it. Here is a so-called string pulling puzzle. This is a task that is again borrowed from work on primates and corvid birds, where the only way to get to a reward is to pull on a string. And what you see here are 6 artificial flowers, each with a string attached and displayed under a plexiglass board. And you can see here that the flower has a central well, and you need to pull on that string to get to the reward. And what you're seeing here, this is just a few weeks old footage, was the first honeybee that ever solved this task. And so she managed, after quite some training, but she managed to learn to pull a string just like a clever monkey to get to the reward. And when I showed this video to some non-bee experts, they thought, well, maybe that bee just wants to crawl under the table and accidentally pulls the string along the way. But I showed them another little video here where there are multiple bees present. Our star bee, the only bee at that point who was able to pull strings, is over here. It's marked with a sort of turquoise dot. There she is. And you can see, as it always happens in the human realm as well, there's one individual that knows what to do. Everyone else has no idea, but wants the same goodies, that is the sugar water. And so what happens is that all the other bees basically pounce on that poor knowledgeable bee's back, distracting her and disturbing her. But in the end, finally, she finds a moment that she's undisturbed. There she goes. And now finally successfully pulls the string. Once she succeeded, of course, everyone else wants to have a share of the reward. So all the other bees pounce on the same flower and help themselves to the nectar that is available there without actually doing any of the work. I find this footage very enjoyable, so I'll let you look at it a little longer. So you can see the other bees are still trying. They still have no idea what they're doing. The only knowledgeable individual is our turquoise dot. But again, there's lots of interference from other bees until again she finds a tiny moment where no one's disturbing her, and she pulls the next string. And of course, the process repeats. The ignoramus bees want their share of the nectar without doing any of the hard work or learning the task. But there you go. So bees can learn string pulling tasks in many ways just as impressively as much larger brained animals as well. And one of the most unique things in the honeybee, of course, is its dance communication, its ability to use symbols, movement patterns, to indicate to hive mates where they have located a reward. You see the dancing bee here at a 45-degree angle to the vertical. And in my experience, it usually helps to remind people a bit what the dance language actually signifies and how it works. So here's a simpler display of the dance language. In this case, on the vertical comb, what you're seeing is that the dancing bee is running straight up. And this indicates to other bees who have to monitor this dance in the darkness of the hive. You can't see the dancer, you have to follow it physically by touching it. This display, dancing straight up, tells other bees fly in the direction of the sun. Once you've memorized the pattern, you have to leave the hive, decode it in temporal and spatial removal from the act of picking up the information, and then fly, in this case, in the direction of where the sun is currently located. Here's Carl von Frisch, the Nobel laureate who originally discovered the dance in his lederhosen. He was actually my scientific great-grandfather, so he trained Martin Lindauer, who in turn trained Randolph Menzel, who trained me. And he discovered this dance language. If you see a waggle run straight down on the vertical comb, that tells other bees fly in the opposite direction of the sun, fly away from it. And any other angle, for example, 90 degrees to the right of the vertical, tells the follower bees the angle relative to the sun outside. So 90 degrees to the direction of gravity means to the dance attending bees, fly 90 degrees to the right of the sun once you've left the hive. And so here is a 45-degree angle again. So
we lost connection. Internet froze.
Lars, can you hear us?
I think we must have lost, oh, no, I'm watching on Zoom, so yeah,
We lost.
Oh, we lost you for a moment.
okay, are we all good? Are we back to where we were before?
Yeah, just share your slides again.
You were talking about the waggle dance.
Yes, okay.
Got to where you had 45 degrees.
Yes, so let me share again. Now I think we're back.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. So as opposed to a magnetic compass, of course, the sun, in a magnetic compass, the needle always points north. The sun, however, is always in a different place according to the time of day. So you also need an internal clock to read the sun compass reliably. And so what I've just shown you, of course, is the course of the sun north of the polar circle, where during the summer it never gets dark. Of course, in many parts of the world, bees only see a partial course of the sun, because for some time of the night, clearly the sun is behind the horizon and can't be seen. But the question is, can bees extrapolate the course of the sun from just what they see during the day? And so here's an historic experiment from Martin Lindauer and Calvin Frisch, who trained bees to memorize 2 different locations at different times of day. So they had to memorize both locations and memorize which one was rewarding when. And in the morning, they offered bees food in the south for about 1 hour after sunrise. And in the evening, they offered it east for an hour before sunset. And bees had to learn both locations and arrive at the correct location at the correct time, and they could do that just fine. But what about the dancing bees? This is the interesting part. So what you're seeing, sorry, part of this figure is in German, but I'll talk you through it. Here's our time of day scale. It starts from midnight, goes through the course of the day until midnight again. The area shaded light is daytime, gray areas are the night. Here is the azimuth angle of the sun, the direction of the sun in which it's currently visible according to time of day. And you can see that this changes from the north, where it's of course just hidden behind the horizon, moves through the course of the day. Here it's in the south, and now it's in the north again at midnight, on the northern hemisphere, that is. Now, during the feeding times, this is the morning feeding hour, all the dances indicate a location correctly to the right of the sun, in the south. So here, food is available in the south. All dancers correctly indicate the southern location. In the evening hour, over here, that's our afternoon feeder, all the dancers point east, again, correctly to the current position of the feeder. But the really astonishing thing was when the authors observed dancing bees at night, completely outside the context of natural foraging, where, of course, all the bees stay in the hive. Some bees would spontaneously wake up, basically, and display dances. Where did they indicate? In the hours before midnight, all the bees would indicate the afternoon location, whereas in the early morning hours before sunrise, there's some scatter here, but bees would mostly indicate the southerly location as available in the morning hours. So these bees, out of context, spontaneously retrieved spatial memories at night, correctly extrapolated the course of the sun that was not visible from the part that they did know, and then indicated the correct locations with dancers during the night. So apparently recruiting distant memories in an entirely flexible manner outside the regular communication context. So there seems to be, in this case, a kind of mental representation of space and of time. Here is a simple concept learning task. This is a task where the bees have to memorize not just a particular visual pattern, but the arrangement of patterns. And so the task for the bee is to fly into a Y maze and to turn either left or right, depending on whether or not there is an item above another item. And the one item that always stays the same in all the arms is this cross, the X shape that you can see here. This is what we call the referent. The referent is always in all the trials that you're going to see is the same. The other item, though, varies. And the task of the bee is to locate the arm of the Y maze where there's something, anything above the referent. So in this case, because the anything is above the referent is on the left side, the bee's task is to disregard the right side and fly to the left side. And let's see what she does. Here comes the bee, and she flies straight into the right arm. So far, so good. Maybe she's just memorized this particular arrangement. Now we're looking at the next video where you can see the familiar referent. That always stays the same. But she can't solve the task now by remembering what she's previously seen, because suddenly there's something novel. There is now a black circle that's either above or below the referent. And because it's above the referent in the left arm again, the task is to fly into the left arm. And that's what our bee does. But of course, from trial to trial, we vary where that thing is that's above the referent. It doesn't always stay the same. And so over many trials, this is what we're showing the bee. So this is how this kind of experiment is typically displayed by psychologists. You start with the first pair, this is the second pair, then you have multiple more pairs, and so on. So in the first pair here, again, a referent is on both sides. In the first pair here, by now you can figure out the task probably yourself. The correct arm is the right one because the right arm has this radioactivity signal. So you have to turn right because that's where that anything above the referent is displayed. Second trial, the correct arm is left because here there's a completely novel thing above the referent, but it's where the aboveness display is on the left side. That's where you have to go. Here in the third pair, again, you have to go left because your new item now that's above the referent is again on the left. Final trial here, it's on the right. Let's see how the bees are doing with experience. We start with one block of trial. Each block has 5 trials of this sort of kind, and we always vary whatever is on display. Within about 30 trials, the bees get to 80% correct trials. Now, you can teach primates this kind of task. It will usually take them several months to learn it. Bees learn it in the course of one day to figure out this aboveness or belowness task. Of course, you can train them the inverted task as well. So there's a simple spatial concept that bees are able to acquire very, very rapidly, and in fact at a faster speed than you find in very much larger brain species. Now we'll come to the final and perhaps most difficult point, the question of whether bees might have feelings, including pain-like experiences, for example, and we have to acknowledge right away that this is a difficult task. You can see just how difficult it is when you look at the current debate about when an artificial intelligence system might be said to be sentient. There is no universally accepted single test where you can say, aha, now that animal or that machine can feel something. So all we can do is use some common sense. But in past decades, of course, people quite strongly dismissed the possibility that a bee might feel something, including pain. So Calvin Frisch, the Nobel laureate, said this about the possibility of pain perception. A bee sits at the feeder and imbibes sugar water. You cut off her abdomen at the thin waistline with scissors. Her head and thorax stay in place and the meal proceeds, only that everything leaks out at the back. A little lake of sugar water grows in that place where the abdomen belongs, because the bee never satiates and keeps sucking until she keels over, exhausted, but ending her life in pleasure. Such behavior is incompatible with the perception of pain. This would simply not make sense in animals with a hard exoskeleton. In us, with our soft skin, pain is a life-saving warning sign that ensures that we duly avoid injury. Now, as smart as the man was, I think with this, he was clearly mistaken. We now know that all insects have so-called nociceptors. These are specialized mechanoreceptors that respond to injury or at least potential injury, so strong mechanical stimuli. And these exist pretty much across the animal kingdom, including in insects. Now, that doesn't, however, necessarily mean that bees feel ouch-like pain, that there is actually a sensation of unpleasantness. You might still think, okay, they might respond to noxious stimuli, but all the responses are reflex-like. And that turns out not to be the case. Here's an now historic experiment by Jose Núñez and colleagues, where they tested bees' sting extension reflexes as a result of varied electric shocks, mild electric shocks, so up to, I think, 8 volt, not much more, so the bees weren't electrocuted. And you know, of course, that when a bee attacks a mammal with elastic skin, that's the last thing it does. It's a suicidal attack that results in the bee's death. That's because the stinger is barbed and stays behind with the poison gland that and the last nerve center that continues pumping poison. And so this voluntary laying down of one's life is actually very uncommon in the animal kingdom. Most animals by default will flee from the source of a threat. But it turns out that bees have basically a painkiller system that buffers them against the threat that comes from this lethal injury, and makes them, in that sense, overcome the natural response to avoid the injury. And this is what Núñez and his co-authors observed. When you just measure bees' stinging extension reflex as a function of mild electric shock, starting from 1 volt, 2 volt forward up to 8 volt, then over up to 4 volt, the response increases. More and more individuals extend their stinger. After 4 volts, it goes down moderately, but it stays at a relatively high level, the bee's sting extension response. If, however, these bees that are tested with electric shocks are exposed to alarm pheromone, it turns out that the alarm pheromone does not just have the effect of recruiting other bees to the source of the threat to engage in stinging as well, but it also makes the bees painless. So under high exposure to alarm pheromone, almost none of the bees, only up to 10% of the bees, respond to the electric shock with stinging extension. So these bees become increasingly immune to noxious stimulation, and therefore perhaps are less afraid, but certainly less vulnerable to pain. So the alarm pheromone has 2 functions. Number 1, to alert other bees to the source of a threat or the presence of a threat, but also to render these fearless warriors basically painless. And that flexibility of modulating your response to a noxious stimulus is, of course, one of the hallmarks of human pain. There's tremendous plasticity. We do not just respond in a reflex-like manner to noxious stimulation. And there are a number of other lines of work that are at least suggestive of bees having various pleasurable or unpleasurable emotion-like states. And one line of research that we and others pursue is bees seeking nature's drugs. So some plant species, for example, are quite rich in psychoactive substances like caffeine and nicotine. And it turns out bees actually develop a preference for caffeine or nicotine-laced nectar. And while this isn't any proof of positive emotion-like states, it's at least an interesting question to explore why, if you do seek out deliberately mind-altering drugs, why would you do that if you don't have a mind that can be altered in some way? Just a very brief introduction into the sophistication and beauty of bees' brains. So they are undoubtedly small. They're about a cubic millimeter, about less than a million neurons in honeybees. But they're beautifully miniaturized. So what you're seeing here is a frontal view of a bee's brain here, the so-called optic lobes. These process visual information. This sort of what looks like an old-fashioned telephone dial arrangement is the so-called antennal lobe that's the first relay processing olfactory information. And these dorsal structures that are folded a bit like a human cortex are the so-called mushroom bodies. And these mushroom bodies are centers of multisensory integration, but also of associative memories. And the complexity that reveals itself once you look inside these brains is stunning. So if you look at the nerve cell types in these three blue shaded areas, the visual ganglia, there are more different nerve cell types in there than there are in the human retina. So the complexity of the neural processes, while they're miniaturized, very small, the complexity is stunning. And this is highlighted once you actually look at the structure of individual nerve cells in a bee's brain. Here's one such cell. This is the neuron that actually mediates that actually constitutes the reward pathway in a bee's brain. Here is the cell body, and you can see these branching patterns in vast areas of the bee brain. This neuron is so finely branched as you might expect of a fully grown tree. It's tiny, but no less complex in its branching patterns. And if you imagine that each individual such nerve cell, there are about 1 million of them, can make up to 10,000 connection points with other nerve cells, each of which can at least be potentially plastic and subject to experience. You have a wiring diagram that is still too complex for my neuroscientist colleagues to understand, at least in its full comprehensiveness. So we are getting closer with fruit flies, but they're still an order of magnitude simpler and in terms of their brain structure. And this complexity was recognized quite early on by some of the founding fathers of neuroscience, Ramon y Cajal in this case, who did actually at the time not just dissect human brains to study how they might work, but also insect brains. And he said this when comparing the brains of bees and dragonflies with those of some vertebrates like fish or amphibians. He said, one experiences an extraordinary surprise. The excellence of the psychic machine does not increase with zoological hierarchy. Instead, one realizes that in fish and amphibians, the nervous centers have undergone an unexpected simplification. Of course, their gray matter has increased considerably in mass, but when the structure of their brains is compared with that of bees or dragonflies, they're excessively plain, coarse, and rudimentary. It is as if one were to pretend to hold as equals the merits of a rough grandfather clock with the quality of a fine pocket watch, a marvel of fineness, delicacy, and precision. As always, in building her marvelous works, nature distinguishes herself much more in her tiny creations than in the large. Okay, some very brief take-home messages. I think there is good evidence now that bees find really intelligent solutions to quite complex navigational problems, that from these historic explorations of their dances, they can actually think of locations offline, that they can count and form concepts, and at least by the same criteria that are used for emotion-like states in domestic dogs, laboratory rats, and so on, there appear to be emotion-like states, including pain sensations in bees. And these are, to my mind, key ingredients of an animal mind. They might be very different from how we perceive and think about the world, but we humans are essentially feeling and thinking and suffering and enjoying beings in a world of other thinking and feeling and enjoying and suffering beings. And that, to me, induces a new kind of respect for these beings that surround us. I think people now are aware in general that we need to conserve bees because they pollinate our crops and our garden flowers and so on, but that's an argument from utility. And for me, an additional argument arises from my own decades-long explorations of bee mines, and a new respect has formed there that that actually acknowledges that there is some form of thought and possibly feeling in these tiny brains. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I have one small question.
All right, so speak loudly.
During your test with the facial recognition and object placement, they're black and white. Do they have any infrared component to that at all?
So in that particular study, indeed, we used black and white images deliberately because we used faces that are actually used for test for prosopagnosia, a human psychiatric condition where people can't remember faces while their condition is otherwise unimpaired. We use the same images. They can, of course, see colors. Their visual spectrum extends into shorter wavelengths than ours, so they can see ultraviolet, but they cannot see infrared or even as far into the red as we humans can. So their entire spectrum is shifted to shorter, not longer wavelengths. There are other insects, some so-called fire beetles that lay their eggs on freshly burnt wood, and they actually have infrared receptors, but bees do not.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
We have a question in the back.
I don't think she'll be able to hear me, but someone can translate for me.
Okay.
Does the age of the bee matter on any of these experiments? Are older bees better than younger bees?
So the question is, does the age of the bee influence cognition, memory, the ability to transmit information? Are younger
Yeah,
bees?
that's a very good question. So once the bees have left the hive to engage in foraging, they still, of course, live for several weeks. And at that stage, we've never actually found an age effect on any of these cognitive abilities, whether they're related to learning flowers or learning to string pull or learning to recognize various objects. Once they're at that stage, it doesn't seem to matter all that much. However, around the transition from within hive duties to becoming a forager, there's a very profound reorganization of brain structure. The mushroom bodies that I had mentioned earlier, these sort of structures that are dorsally in the brain and folded a bit like a cortex, the centers of associative memories, they're actually quite tiny in the bees as long as they're engaged in nursing and construction abilities and so on. And in the run-up to the transition to becoming a forager, these structures grow quite substantially. And in the early phase of foraging, they still grow further. And this structural change, of course, basically prepares the brain for storing more memories. It's basically the bees building a bit better hard drive while they're in the run-up to foraging and navigation activities.
So I have a question. When a beehive is disturbed, let's say a beekeeper gets into the hive and kills a bunch of bees, not being very gentle. Does the hive, the individuals that are whether foragers or the ones that are stay in the hive, do they have a memory of that experience? Do you think, or have you done other studies that show how long their memory persists?
Yeah, so these are, the second question is easier than the first. So yes, you can test for various of the paradigms that have shown how long these memories last. And the answer is in many cases very long, often for the entire life of the bee. The most dramatic demonstration of that I'm aware of is an experiment by Martin Lindauer, who looked at winter bees. And in temperate habitats, of course, where it gets to below freezing or to cold temperatures for several months, the bees just stay inside the hive for that duration. And these bees get to be quite old by worker standards. So they can be up to 4 months old, because it's the same bees that forage late in the autumn that then re-emerge on the first spring days to forage. And through the entire winter, they still remember locations where they foraged before the winter. And for human faces also, we tested them for up to a week, and they did still remember the images of human faces. Now, whether bees specifically remember, let's say, adverse experiences from people or animals attacking their hives, I don't think anyone has formally tested that. I've heard of from anecdotal experiences from beekeepers whose hives were attacked by bears, for example, and who said that the bees' response for extended periods after such an attack was very jittery. They would attack at the slightest sort of shadow appearing near their hive entrance. But whether that jitteriness and aggression would have been even more specifically directed to another bear attacking, no one's formally tested that. But it's undoubtedly plausible from what we know about the durability of bees' memories.
Oh, we have another question.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, and that is, each hive seemingly has a different personality that seems to last for quite a while, months or even years.
Yeah.
Do you have an explanation as to why the hives behave so different? Some are aggressive, some are passive. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think beehives, of course, are families. They are families of highly related individuals that share genes, and these genes, at least in part, of course, control their behaviors. And of course, human bee breeders, beekeepers have known this for millennia, and breeders of many other animals, is that you can actually select for things like aggression, and humans have done that with dogs in both directions, as well as with bees, where people have sometimes just got rid of very aggressive hives because they found them unmanageable, and focused on the less aggressive ones. So there is heritable variation between bee colonies, and that can also be bred further. And people have also done this with learning ability, where you can select strains of bees where where the parental colonies are either very rapid learners or very slow learners. They're very dense, basically, and you can also select for learning ability with such selection experiments. So many behavioral traits, of course, are at least in part genetically determined. And then you also find these very robust between colony behavior differences.
Okay, then a follow-up question, if I may, please. That is, many of us purchase bee packages where they're just a conglomerate of bees from maybe potential multiple hives, all put together with a brand new queen who they've never seen before. And then 2 or 3 days later, we put it into a hive box. Even those sets of bees have different personalities. How much does the queen influence that personality right off the bat, right at the very beginning of the introduction?
I mean, the queen, of course, has some means by spreading pheromones to influence what goes on in the hive, but she has, of course, very little power, or in fact, no decision power. So to the extent that with these sort of hives of mixed heritage, it will take a while for the population to build up that is actually based on that queen's own eggs. I think that's when you get the cementing of hereditary traits. But until then, I mean, you'll have a mixture of traits of the source colonies, and these can be either learned or acquired through individual experience or hereditary. So there have been some historic experiments, quite interesting ones, on asking whether honeybees might establish cultures of early risers or late risers. So Martin Lindauer and colleagues, Wolfgang Kirchner and so on, trained bees to forage mostly at particular times of day. They did that during times of the year when there was very little natural food available. Trained some bee colonies to harvest food from feeding stations only in the morning, others in the midday, others in the evenings. And after that had gone on for some time, they would take the brood combs from the entrained colonies, raise them basically in a climatized cupboard, and then once the callow bees had hatched, they would put them into a new colony. And it turned out that the bees so raised transmitted their temporal foraging preferences to the new host hives, because they had somehow, well, Martin Lindauer suggests that what these bees might have picked up as pupae or larvae is the vibrations of the comb while bees were dancing and successfully foraging, linked these time memories while they were in this callow in the larval stage, and then used these memories later once they'd been put into a new colony. But because these bees would then also dance, they transmit their temporal preference to forage either early in the morning or late in the evening to the new host colony. So there's a behavioral trait that gets passed on without genes, just through learning and social interactions.
Well, thank you very much, Lars. This was a treat.
All right, well, thank you for your interest.
Enjoy Mexico.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I can actually be a bad parent, is what I just.
Can't get away with it.
I also heard if you have bees up in like Alaska where it's light all the time, the bees will get in the hive and act like it's night also. So I don't know how they did it, but I had heard that also. So they do take their cues from the sun, but if the sun never sets, you know, they have a work day and a night day, I guess.
So what do they do on, let's say, 10 days of cloudiness?
I give up.
I was wondering, all their bearings are from the sun.
Right, well, I would assume that it's the same thing as would be in when it's too cold outside, that they would just stay in the hive and twiddle their thumbs and make, and well, they'll start making queen cells if they feel they're too crowded or they're not out working. So after a time when it's cloudy and rainy and yucky, you may have swarms in the next week after that, just because that's what they do. So if you don't, bees will do what they want to do. So just try and get over it.
Yeah, I watched mine swarm.
Yeah.
Oh, no. It was quite amazing. That's why, but
Yeah.
So all of our presentations
No, I would-
this year have finally been edited and put up onto our YouTube channel. So thank you very much to Grieve for doing that for us. So you just have to type in WBA channel. And you should be able to find all of the videos. And then hopefully within a week, we'll get this presentation up online, so you can review it if you want to.
Yeah, I call that. I don't know.
We've got some upcoming events and we need your support. We are gonna be participating in Bug Fest. This is in August.
There is a sheet that went around with the sign sheet for the meeting. Did everybody sign in your attendance and then look at that? There's a sign-in sheet for Bug Fest as well there.
Alright, so nobody's signing up to participate at Bug Fest. It's a lot of fun. Mike?
I just want to point out, Budfest is at the Natural History Museum on the University of Utah campus, and it's really fun.
Yeah, it was really neat last year.
So please sign up.
We'll have our observation line there.
So I'm gonna pass it around again. These are just 2-hour.
You don't have to be an expert, it's mostly kids and families.
It's really fun.
We'll have an observation there, hide there for everybody to look at. We'll also have our photo booth there, and they can put on like the bug eye glasses and the bee wings and that kind of stuff and take pictures in the photo booth. What else and just general kid information.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna try to have the hands-on component where people can learn how to tell the difference between a bee, a wasp, and a fly.
Yeah,
So
and then also maybe how to make a bee watering station.
right. So there's lots of different things. Yeah, and the time just flies by. But we do need volunteers, and we're gonna need about 64, 68 volunteers for the state fair.
You have that sign up sheet yet?
No, but we'll
Okay.
what? No, not yet.
That'll be in the next meeting then.
Yes,
Okay.
for sure. All right, so I wanted to run through a couple of things and then we're gonna let Jerry speak a bit about what to do with your splits, if you wanna recombine, how to maximize honey production. So what are your bees? Typically, what are they doing this time of year? Just like they were doing last month, population size is increasing. Peak number of eggs laid per day should peak sometime in July. If you've got a weaker hive, if you still have a hive that's only one deep, then you may want to combine it with a stronger hive. You may want to requeen. Right now is an indicator of how healthy and how strong your hive is now is an indicator of how healthy that hive will be going into winter, and whether or not you have a chance of successfully overwintering your hive. So our honey flow, nectar flow, we're in the thick of it. It should continue until about mid-July or so. So now's the time to put on your honey supers. If your hive is strong enough, if they built up a large enough population size, you're gonna see a lot more bearding, especially in the last couple of days. You probably saw your bees hanging out on the outside of the hive, even at night. That's totally normal. All those little bees, every time they move, they're releasing heat, and all that heat accumulates in a small space. If you can, figure out how to provide some shade for your bees during the hottest part of the afternoon.
Wait, Nicole, you can also, if you notice a lot of bearding and they're fanning, trying to cool the hive, you can put pennies at the corners to just lift your hive boxes up just a little bit, and it gives them a little bit more ventilation.
Yep.
Cools them off a little bit.
So you want to make sure that your hive doesn't get honey bound. 2 of our hives here in the apiary, I hadn't been able to get into them for about 16 days, and there was essentially no room for the queen to lay. So there's not a lot of brood, there was too much honey. So you want to make sure that you get into your hives routinely so that you can give them all the space that they need, so that your population size continues to increase as we go into late summer. Because the bees will preferentially store honey at the expense of giving the queen a place to lay. Swarming is still possible, So again, providing enough space will help with problems with swarming. Look for those swarm cells. Add honey supers as needed. So when do you need to add a honey super? When that first deep or when your first super has at least 75% wax and or with nectar. And then, and also what time of the season. So you want to make sure you're adding that additional honey super when there's still several weeks, more than 2 weeks of the nectar flow. If a super is full but not fully capped, and you only have frames with foundation, the best idea is to add the new super underneath the almost full super, because bees are used to already going out, delivering their payload. So this will encourage them to explore the new area, which is all that fresh foundation. If you got the same thing, but you've got frames with comb, so you've got frames from the previous year, you can choose to add the new super on top while you're waiting for all those other cells full of nectar to be capped, to be fully hydrated or dehydrated. Or you can decide to use what we call a checkerboard method. And this is where you're going to alternate the full and empty frames from the 9 or 10 that you had in your original honey super into 2 new supers. So what does that look like? It's every single new frame that you add, whether it's foundation or comb, it's fully surrounded by frames with honey. And that's going to encourage them to build the new comb straight. If you only use 9 frames in your honey super and you spread them out, it will allow that each of those frames to be built more deeply. So you get more honey per frame. It's easier to cut off or to take the caps off at the end of the season. You still want to be evaluating that brood pattern. You want to make sure that the eggs and larvae are in, they're in every cell. But you don't see a lot of spaces between cells. If you see a lot of empty spaces, it either suggests that there's something wrong with the larvae, that the queen is not laying eggs when she thinks she is. So she's essentially a misfire. And you really want to think about, if you need to be queen, you should do it now. Because you need to get that population size high enough so that the entire colony, or enough of the colony, can survive through the winter. Monitor for varroa. However you want to do that, whether you're testing with soap, washes, if you're looking for diseases in your hive, it can also give you an indication of the varroa pressure on the hive. You can use those integrated pest management approaches, removing excess drone broods, since they take longer to develop, they're larger, they're more likely to have to be infested with varroa. You can institute a brood interruption. Maybe you already got one of those because something happened to your queen and now you're going to wait for them to make a queen, or you're going to introduce a queen. But if you have a break in brood, you can also bring your mite load down. Strongly recommend you check out the Honeybee Health Coalition. They've got a nice PDF and it gives you a step-by-step approach. What chemicals can you use depending on what temperature profile for where you live, for treating for mites, how to implement other features to help keep the hive healthy. Providing ventilation is super important. We've been having massive heat waves. The cold is hard on bees, the heat is harder because they can't naturally cool themselves down. They don't have evaporative cooling, they don't sweat. So you want to use pennies or popsicle sticks to create space between all of your boxes. You can chisel an opening if your inner cover doesn't already have a little ventilated opening in the front. Stagger your supers slightly to let the air, the hot air rise. Use a screened bottom board. You can use a screened inner cover. Add an empty, medium, or deep on top of your hive for the hot air to have a place to rise. Providing afternoon shade is a real easy way to combat a lot of the pressures due to heat. And having fresh water available. They have to have water to be able to maintain their own metabolism, to be able to cool the hive. When do you stop adding supers? So the best information I can find on this is that if you're within 2 weeks of the honey flow ending, which in Salt Lake City area is about mid-July, you don't want to add any more. Because you're gonna have gaps, you're gonna have places where the nectar is not capped yet. And this will give you a better return. That way you don't have to worry about, oh, should I take this frame? It's only partially capped. You know that if it's fully capped, it most likely is 17% water or less. Typically, in this area, all of my honey is between 13 and 15% water, which is safe, means it's gonna have a long shelf life and won't spoil. So how much honey to harvest? If you have only one brood box, then you wanna leave all the honey there, which typically means at least 4 frames of honey on both sides. You're gonna wanna feed sugar water. If you have 2 brood boxes, and you plan on feeding, then you can take up to half of that honey. But if you don't plan on feeding your bees, then you want to err on the side of caution and leave about 40 pounds of honey in that second brood box. I've never seen my bees eat that much honey. Anybody here? Or, yeah, usually come spring, I still have honey in my boxes. But it also helps with insulation, temperature control. After harvesting, some people say feed, others say don't feed because it gives all sorts of messages to that colony that they still need to ramp things up rather than starting to prepare for winter. If you've got a brand new hive, if you've got a hive that's struggling, then feed so they can build more comb, at least to fill out one brood box. So there's enough space for everyone come winter. Should you put your supers back on the hive after extracting? What you want to avoid is just laying out your frames in your yard and having bees from all over the place come and clean that up. So to keep from inviting a bunch of other bees from other hives who may have a very high mite load from mingling with your bees, put that super back on the hive and let them clean it, but only for 24 hours. Because if you leave it longer, they're going to start putting nectar in it. And then you've just got a mess to deal with. Then you've got a bunch of uncured nectar.
And if you put it back on the hive, you need to have an empty box between. So that the bees are looking at it, they're robbing it. If you put it right back on directly on top of the brood box, then they're gonna continue to put honey in it.
That's a great idea. Okay. So to
Or
get
just
them.
wait till next spring.
I'm curious to clarify that with you. I extract twice a year. Got about 8 hives produced, just got about 25 gallons. I put them right back on and I plan on getting another 20 gallons. So
But it's still early in the season, so if you were,
oh, you're
I'm talking about
late in
later.
the season.
Yes,
Okay.
late in the season.
Yeah, because this is a great, this is a great time to be extracting and I would suggest if you're extracting and putting it back on, I used to kind of pull all the boxes off, so I got a garage full and then do it. I take it, I extract it within 24 hours, that box is right back on the hive that I just took it from.
Yeah. All right, so Jerry, you want to talk to us about what to do with splits, and recombining and.
Well, you covered things so well, I don't know where we go then, maybe ask some questions on it, but I live in Bountiful. And last year, by the end of June, I had already extracted 2 boxes per hive. This year, it's way behind, and I've got bees from where I live in you know, almost to North Salt Lake, and I have bees that are in downtown Bountiful, and they're all seem the same. How's everybody else? Are you getting a good honey flow?
Yeah, I'm getting great.
Where, yeah,
I'm in Mill Creek.
Yeah, I don't have any agricultural area. Mostly what we get is out of the gullies, and then I don't know, the Russian sage is starting to bloom. I don't know how much honey we actually get off it. There's a lot of bees around, but I think if you've got a new hive, the main thing you want to do this year is take care of it so that it's going to make it through the winter. And sometimes we tend to want to super it or build it up before it's ready for it. So if you've got frames that aren't drawn, don't go adding another box to it until you get those drawn out. And then you know, we still have time for a lot of honey to come in. If the bees are still up and doing well. If what was I going to say? That was a great presentation, wasn't it? Those bees are so smart. I don't know how we ever can ever get with them, but
maybe you could talk a bit about when you do your splits and you use the double screen divider.
Yeah.
How you know when it's time to recombine them.
okay, what I do is, for those may not know, I try to have my hives strong in 2 boxes in the spring. And I feed them in the spring to stimulate them. And then about the 15th of March, I have queens that I order to come in from California. And I take my hive that's 2 boxes high and a strong hive, and I go in and make a divide. I take out all of the capped brood. And the way I do it is you take the frame and shake all the bees off. And put them into if you've got several hives, you kind of put them into a gathering spot. So you've taken your hives and you've taken out the cap brood, and then you've replaced that with empty comb. You're not going to put it in the same spot because you don't want to break the nest that you put in. So now you've got your mother hive, which doesn't have any cap brood in it, and so it's going to be. When you're putting in the comb, the queen now has a lot of place to lay to go. It'll help you not have swarming. And then I take, and it depends on either 3 or 4 frames of the cap brood that I've taken off. And I'll put a queen excluder and I'll put that back on the hive. So what you'll have then, you'll have your hive, the 2 boxes of your hive with some empty combs in it from the ones that you've stolen. And then you got a 3rd box that contains those 4 frames of capped brood, plus other drawn comb and some pollen and honey that's with it. And you have, so you put a queen excluder between it. So then overnight, the bees are going to come up into the 3rd box to take care of the brood that's up there. The reason you shook them all off was so that you had the queen out. If you find the queen, then you don't have to go through that step, but I never even look for it. I assume that she's in the bottom. And then, so we made this divide, the bees would come up into there, and then I put on a double screen divider. And does everybody know what a double screen divider or care about it? If somebody wants to, I think there's someone in the back of my truck if somebody wants to run and get one. Do anybody care about it or not?
I'll go get one.
Okay. But what the double screen divider is, what it is, it's a board. And then I have 2 big holes in it that put screen on both sides of it. And then it has an opening in one spot on it. So you put that on your hive. And so it's a separator. So you've got two separate hives. And by having the double screen on it, the heat from the bottom will come up and take care of the brood up on the top, because you're talking about the middle of March. And then they exist as two separate hives. The one on the top, the one on the bottom. And when you put that, and then so as I put them back together, I put a new queen in a cage in the top. Any field bees that are in that top box, when they fly out, they're gonna come back and they're gonna go home to their old home down below. So all you have in that top one now are young bees. And I've never, and I've done this for years, I've never had it where they rejected the queen. Because you've got just young bees, and they'll get that queen out in just a couple of days, and then she goes to laying. And then you keep them at that stage. Usually you have to end up putting a honey super on, because they're starting to get crowded. But by the 1st of June, honey will be coming in. So then what I do is I take that double screen divider out, put them together. So now we have a 3-box brood box. And the bees will get along just fine. You lose one of the queens, and it's usually going to be the old queen that will go. So you've got a young queen on the top. And then you can put three deep supers on the top. And the honey comes in. Sorry. So there are a lot of fancy ones made. This is just my standard. So what I've done, and the materials are DD. That's dumpster diving. It's a lot cheaper. You go by where somebody's doing some building and you get the dumpster and you get this is just the siding that you have on the house. If you can get that underlayment that goes into floors now, it's a full 1-inch plywood. It's really good stuff on it. And then I just cut these strips of 1 by 3/8 and nail it around. So there's one strip here. This is the entrance. So when this is on the hive, then this is on the 2 boxes, and then we have the 1 box on the top, and the bees come and go, and the heat comes up from here until they're taken care of. And then when you pull this and put them back together, then you've got a honey making machine.
And you
And
don't see
you make a lot of honey. Pardon?
You don't see mass die off because the bees are fighting from the 2 hives.
No, they don't. If the bees are busy, taking care of honey, I've never had it with a fight. No, they go on it.
Have you got a queen both on top of the excluder and underneath the excluder?
Yes.
And you're saying that so the established queen is gonna be on the underneath.
Right.
And when you introduce a new queen on the top, with the young bees, you don't have any problem with them rejecting.
Right, because you do it, if you do it before the honey flow comes,
yeah,
they'll swarm. So you gotta have the flow coming, which usually around the 1st of June, as soon as we start getting it. And you can you look in the top and you can see that the combs are white and they're bringing nectar in. And it works. I'm not gonna get it this year, but my backyard last year, I had 4 hives that ran this way. And I took off 300, 300, and 200 pounds. I took 800 pounds of honey off of those.
That just sounds like work.
Yeah, but it's in the backyard, it's not so bad. So I have bees, 4 hives is as many as I have in one location, and I put it in people's backyard that have got a 1/2 acre lot. And it's pretty hard coming down that hill when you got those boxes full of honey. But it makes you feel good to hurt when you're doing it. But I think that for now, we touched on it some already, but then if you're starting out with new hives this year, your main goal is to get your hive built up strong enough with stores to last through the winter. So you got to take care of your mites and give them the space they need. You don't put your second box on until the bottom box is pretty well grown out and they need this space. And a lot of times if it's new, especially if you start from foundation, you may not have put a honey super on this year. What I suggest to people, especially if you're just starting out, you'll have at least one frame in that hive somewhere that's going to be full of honey and capped. Take it off, stand it up like a colander in your sink, and take a fork and scrape the honey off. And go down to the foundation, but don't go so much that it's all off the foundation. You just want to have, a little bit, a nub is left so the bees have something to work on. But then you take and stir it around in a colander, let it drain, and you'll have a quart of honey and be happy that you got something from your bees. Because there's nothing like that first honey that you have. I don't know, I've kept bees for many years. I don't know how many more years I can do it, but I'm gonna keep going. But I started it was either 71 or 73 when I started keeping bees. So that's been quite a while ago.
Just a day or two.
All right, so is it too late to combine them? If you have hives that want to combine?
Well, if you got a weak hive, if you got a hive, you need to be deciding in this few weeks, is that hive going to make it? If it isn't going to make it, then you need to combine it with another one. But for combining it to make more honey, are you going to look? Do you want to have another hive, or do you want to combine? If you got a weak one, you can do. Another thing you can do with swarms. Now this has been a good year for swarms, and I got.
You've gotten several of them.
Well, yeah, but you only called me with 2 or 3, I think. And I got 8 or 10, so you get enough people call you. I've got one of the hives in my backyard. It consists of 3. There's 3 swarms. So what I do is I get them in a box, and then I set up a hive in the backyard on a sheet in my backyard out on the lawn, and I shake them out of the box down in front of the hive, and they go in, and then I have it on a sheet so that when they've all gone in towards the evening, I just take the sheet and you fold it, and then I put a strap around it, and you can move it wherever you want to, and then you unfold it, and the next morning they're out and happy. But what I've been doing is I take it and put it on top. I set one up on a stand in the backyard, and then a week later I got another swarm, and I took it and put it on top just take a piece of plywood this size, and you set your hive on top, and you slide it forward about 3/4 of an inch. So if there's a hole here, so then this hive on the top, they're going to come out. That'll be their opening they can have on it. And then and see, it's going to be the time of year that's about time for the honey flow. So if you're getting a little bit of honey flow coming, then I just go out one night and I slide that back, so that and so I slip that board out. So I just put the 2 together.
And you do it at night?
I do it in the evening. And I did that with 3 swarms. They weren't giant swarms, but they were good sized swarms. But I got 3 swarms and they're making honey.
And again, you're just letting the queens fight it out.
Yeah, they work it out. Well, if you've got honey coming in, they're not gonna be fighting. And if each one of them's got some brood, you know, they're fine. Let's see, to do the third one, I did with the third one was I just put on an empty super on the top of the second. And then I just shook the bees in it in the evening. And by the next morning, everybody's happy.
Have you ever opened it up and found more than one queen still active and working?
No, I can't find the queens. My eyes aren't that good.
There's at least one in there.
I can see brood, I can see cat brood. So if they got brood, then we know that they're doing okay.
If you combine a weaker hive, is there a specific, like, do you do the newspaper method or do you just move? I mean, if you're gonna combine a weak hive or maybe one that has.
Yeah, if it's if there's not honey, if there isn't a honey flow coming in and you need to combine them, then I put a sheet of newspaper down. One sheet and take your hive tool and punch 2 or 3 holes in it. So as the bees eat that to take it out, they've got a place to start on it.
And at that point, do you care if there's more than one queen?
And they'll take care of who's gonna be queen. And I've heard sometimes you'll have 2 queens working together for a while. And I can't find the queens very easy.
All right, any other questions?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I really do have a very aggressive hive.
Yeah.
It's probably been the most aggressive hive I've had in 10 years. Suggestions on how to calm that hive down.
Well, you gotta get rid of those old bees. If you got another little hive that you want to combine with it, or if you want to do a new queen, what I would do for adding a new queen is if you got a nuke box, it's great, but set you up a hive on. So you got your 2 boxes of bees here. On the top of that, take out a frame of that's got some cat brood on it and some bees. Make sure you don't have the queen. Set her up in a separate. Set that up in a separate box up on the third. So all you have in there are 2 frames with some brood in it and some bees. And you take your new queen in the cage and put her in with those. Now and you set it up so you got an opening, whatever you want to do, so that it'll be a separate hive, but you only got 2 frames. The old bees, the field bees that are in there, when they fly out, they're going to come back home to their old home. So all you're going to have are young bees that are up there, and the young bees will accept a new queen. And then after a week, when she's laying and she's got a nest set up, then you've got to get rid of your old queen. And if you can't find her, you can always shake them through an excluder, but get rid of your old queen. And then you're gonna have to. It'll be a month before they're not cranky anymore, because it'll take that long for the old bees to die off.
The genetics will change too as you get a new queen.
Yeah, that's why it's going to be. You're gonna have new genetics, new bees. The worst one I ever had was when 10 years ago or so, I got a call from, is it Love's? Is that on North Temple, the truck stop?
Yeah.
There was a bus, a trailway bus out there that had covered with bees. And what had happened was somebody from California bringing a load of bees heading east, and they'd stop there at night and either overslept or wait till the sun came out or something, because when he left, he left a lot of bees and they all clustered on that bus. So I went over there and I spent, I don't know, an hour and a half brushing bees and got until I had a whole box of bees. And I brought them home and put them on one of my hives in the backyard because there wasn't a queen with it. So these are all old field bees, California. In my backyard. They were not happy bees. It took about 3 weeks, and then settled down because they lived out their life. Because there would have been the old field bees that would have been flying out off the truck. But
I was a little distracted. Did you give them an extra box and give them lots of room?
no,
Okay.
there weren't that. I don't remember. Yeah, you don't want to go building supers up to,
Yeah.
but you know.
Yes, they had plenty of room. And there were 3 boxes, but already drawn out. It's an established hive.
Yeah.
But just gonna be them. So we got new package, put it in, 3 boxes that are fully drawn out already. Some with honey already on the sides.
And they're
And
just mad from the beginning.
I'll tell you what, they are just the underest things. It's like a teenager.
Yeah.
You know, I picked up a hive from SK, who's a member, one year. He called and said, you can take these bees, I had surgery, I don't want these bees. We went over and moved them. They weren't happy when we moved them. They were even less happy once they got to my backyard. And the minute you open the door, it's like they heard the door open and they shot out of that hive to chase you down.
Yeah.
I gave him to David Bench. He split them into like 5 different boxes. And he said they all calmed right down. So I don't know, maybe split them hard. If you want more bees, you could split them hard and add queens, but.
I had an aggressive hive last year and I called her. Every time I got into that hive, everybody in the neighborhood would get stung. And finally, the guy called me and said, get these bees out of here. It was the greatest, it was in Sandy. It was the greatest place to ever have bees. I got 700 pounds of bees off that area right there last year. But those bees were so aggressive. I mean,
They do say more aggressive bees make more honey, but.
yes, they really do, but you pay a price.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
If you're just starting out, get a mentor and use the mentor. You know, I sign up for the mentor every year and people will call me once or twice and then I never hear from them again. I guess I discourage them too much. They want a 5-minute answer and don't have an hour and a half to get it.
And if you really, really, really need help, like this gentleman back here was asking, like, a lot of people call the swarm hotline with lots of questions about their bees. I can walk them through some things on the phone, and I usually do, but I can also, like, if you need a mentor, I can usually find somebody to match you up with. Or help Jen find somebody to match you up with, or if it's just like a one-time thing, you need help doing something because you had an injury or something. We can usually find somebody in the club to come out, and we're a good club, like we've got lots of helpful people, so don't ever hesitate to ask for help. If you need help, so.
Cause that's too much money, you know, and we did, there was an article in the Bountiful Clipper. That with my son and I. 1973. It's a full page with our pictures and the whole works on it. And I put it on, as I talked to the reporter, I said, and it said in that article, it's getting expensive to keep bees. A package costs $20.
Wow. Good old days.
But that was when gas was what? 20 cents?
20 cents, yeah.
25 cents.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
All right.
Well, it's fun. I really enjoyed being with
We
you
appreciate
guys.
all your help, Jerry.
Right. We'll reconvene July 25th.
Fireworks won't even be out by then, will they? By the way, do fireworks bother bees?
I don't think so.
I don't think.
I mean, lawnmowers do, I don't know.
Lawnmower because of the vibration.
Yeah.
Well, I've been trying that, so, but my bees are next to my garden, I till my garden up. You know, and they don't care. Only if the vibration is against the hive. Right. Or if it's somehow the vibration stays against the hive. But. No.
Alright. So. How were the bees out there? How many hives did you get into, Ramel?
We got into one hive, we got into the hive that had three deeps.
The blue, it was blue and the
Yeah,
black.
blue.
How's
We were able to, there's plenty of bees in it. And so we went through the 3 boxes and I pulled 10 that didn't have any brood. Got plenty of honey if you wanna use it, so and so we reduced to 2 deeps and then we put an extra super on.
Okay,
And so, you know, if we wanted to, if we had a queen, you could easily start a new hive with all of that. I mean, what you do is a split, but take some of the honey frames, put it with an existing hive, new queen and some bees, maybe you can even pull it from 3 or 4 hives.
yeah, I don't want any more hives, there's 7.
Yeah. I'm just-
Twenty.
We had one medium frame of capped honey that's frame him apart.
Ah.
So that's laid out there separate for you to take home and scrape off.
Okay, so the frames are sitting somewhere, are they in a box?
Just the one frame in the
That-
box.
The one that came apart, and then the empty box that was on top of the hive.
Okay, yeah, that was
We
just a
pulled
space.
that up because there was no frame to
Yeah,
set it down, and that's where the broken frame is.
okay,
It had no nails in it.
Oh.
Just glue. No, I don't even believe it, just. Lives in it, and they just came apart.
okay,
The one I did the 2 supers, if we have any supers with some honey in, because they're pretty just foundation, have a little bit of drying out, but it's mostly foundation. It'd be nice to get a few frames with some honey in it. I didn't feel safe not putting the second super on because there's enough bees, I didn't want it to feel plugged.
right, right.
Uh,
Yeah, so I've actually got 3 frames of honey that I pulled off another hive that I was saving. And I can put it back in there.
Yeah, I'd say put it back in, that'll help draw them up and.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for inspecting them. All right,
I just wanna thank Nicole. Nicole doesn't live far from here and she has taken on the duty of all of these hives and regular inspections, and she does inspections like nobody I've ever seen. You know exactly what's on every frame of every bee and every bee of every frame in that hive. So plus she's got her own hives and keeps hives and helps me over at Westminster. So thank you.
you're welcome. All right.
Guess that means. Thank you.